A refeição é o meio que nós temos para nos aproximarmos destas pessoas. As pessoas em situação de sem-abrigo sentem-se isoladas e, querendo ou não, nós criamos uma relação de proximidade com eles. Facultar uma lacuna emocional que é gigantesca. Nada melhor do que a forma como nós mesmos tratamos as pessoas em situação de sem-abrigo, para que outras pessoas consigam se inspirar também e talvez mudar o conceito que tem dessas pessoas. E é bom ter alguém que nos estende a mão.
Hello, my name is Maris Évora Sagna. I am a United Nations employee. I've lived most of my life in the US, although I am originally from Cabo Verde.
What do you think about homelessness in Lisbon?
I think homelessness in Portugal, and specifically in Lisbon, is a systemic issue. And I believe that the system has unfortunately pushed a lot of its population to the poverty line. There is huge unemployment issues, immigration issues, and there's definitely a gap between the most haves and the not haves in Portugal, and specifically in the capital of Lisbon.
What do you feel when you see someone in this situation?
It's interesting, right? Because Lisbon has a very peculiar situation. The rich are 5 times more rich than the poor. And that's a huge gap. So you either see a very well situation for certain families, and then you see such an unfortunate situation for other families. This disparity is visible in the streets, in the choices of social services like education and health. And I think this is one of the most steep disparities within Western Europe. So the rich being 5 times more rich, and the poor being 5 times less poor than the wealthiest.
How does homelessness affect the population?
As of 2021, Portugal had about 1.6 million people living in less than 550 euros per month. That's really, really hard, given that some rents, or a majority of rents, are above 500 euros in Lisbon specifically. The interesting fact about this is that most of this 1.6 million population are mainly under 18 or above 65 years old. So what does that say? That says that a lot of the workforce is not in Portugal, is not in Lisbon. So they're fleeing, and obviously they're fleeing to escape the poverty line, because again, for 550 a month, you really probably cannot live a balanced life. And I think this is due to unemployment, or the few employment that is available in the country is very low and does not allow them to survive under the salary that they are being offered. So again, the working population, the working mass, is fleeing this situation. So you have these two sides where the little ones are poor and the older ones are poor. Another factor that I think is interesting here to note is that probably means that a lot of parents are having to make the difficult decision to leave their children with their parents. So the children are being raised by grandparents, which means this data is giving this information particularly for these two populations. So I think it's a quite unfortunate scenario for the country. Lisbon is growing spontaneously, but also the crisis, the world economic crisis with inflation is also affecting this situation. And with prices going up, but salaries not accompanying this growth, it's really hard to live under 500 or 550 euros a month.
Do you think there is a stereotype regarding people in the situation of homelessness?
One of the very astonishing elements that I recently learned is that Portugal has the highest HIV and AIDS rate in Western Europe. It is also the country that is the poorest after Romania. So I think these data gives us a little bit of the scenario and the type of people that are in this poverty line. There's huge immigration towards Portugal because, again, there was a systemic incentive for people to come because, as I said in the previous answer, a lot of the Portuguese people are fleeing Portugal. So there's a need of services, so they are creating incentives for immigrants to come. But that saturates the social system, that saturates the environment and does not provide a boost for income, for salary, for all the elements that would improve the lives of Portuguese nationals. So there's unemployment, there is a health crisis. A lot of these HIV and AIDS infected people are drug users, and unfortunately we know the systemic domino effect of this, right? So I think it's affecting Portugal because it's also bringing up other elements of social injustice and other elements of social inequality.
What would you suggest to reduce the number of homeless people?
The minimum salary in Portugal is about 750 to 800 legally. In a country that most of rents are perhaps above 500, that forces a situation that is very crumbling for the population. So for the few that stay or the few immigrants that come, they are living most likely in precarious situations. They are living in probably dangerous situations. I'm speaking of maybe 3-4 families in a 1-bedroom apartment, realistically speaking. And what does that mean? One person gets sick, everyone in that household gets sick. So there is a domino effect. There is a systemic gap because when you have such an influx of people that cannot afford health services because they can barely make the rent money, they are going to saturate the social services, they are going to saturate the hospitals, they are going to saturate the schools. And this creates a reverse effect or an additional effect to the already experienced poverty problem. I think the government of Portugal did an amazing job in creating these incentives to attract people, but these incentives are equally creating this disparity. So, for example, for people that are wealthier, there is absolutely no tax responsibility to come here. So that's amazing, but it is also not contributing for the economic development of the country other than perhaps providing jobs, assuming these families are investing in local businesses or opening local businesses. On one side, you have really high incentives for the wealthy, and on another side, you have really beneficial social incentives for the poor, but it's oversaturated, or there's not sufficient hospitals and services for these families that are less fortunate. So I think the systemic landscape needs rethinking, needs restructuring, and needs to be a bit more realistic for the current situation that is so obvious. And unfortunately, with an economic crisis that is global, Portugal is not going to escape it. So it needs to get ahead. More recently, the government has been dissolved, and I think that's a reflection of the gaps and the challenges that is at a systemic level. So we'll see how the new elected government will contribute to the change.
What would you suggest to reduce the number of homeless people?
I think The Portuguese government needs to look at their systemic incentives, how they are establishing social services, how are they as well creating a taxation system that the median population, or the population with the median income, is not paying so much taxes, because then it defeats the purpose to have a good job, because if you're going to mainly give it away to the government through taxes. So I would say rethink the taxation legislation, rethink the social service legislation, and including the services that are available, and as well rethink of creating more attractive laws and policies for Portuguese people to be able to return to Portugal and or stay in Portugal.
Hello, my name is Veronica and I'm studying in Alameda.
What do you think about homelessness in Lisbon?
I was confronted with this harsh reality. I would never expect to be such an aggravating problem. Each time I walk by that avenue, all I see is more and more and more homeless people. I go to school by the underground and all I see is homeless people begging for money, or some of them without legs and arms.
What do you feel when you see someone in this situation?
I've gotten used to this reality, but I think to myself, what happened to them to be in that position? How did it all went down like this? At the same time that I think that the government or people should be, helping this cause, which they do, I always think that these people lost their faith. I feel that there's a lack of motivation. Another problem is reintroducing these homeless people into society, because there's this stereotype. I try to stay on both sides, so being sensitive and having empathy towards the situation, but there's always another option besides just begging. There's a lack of motivation.
How does homelessness affect the population?
It's not a decreasing problem. More and more homeless people each day, and I circle around Lisbon, and it's sad to see, but with all of these crises of inflation, housing problems, people getting evicted, it's sad to see that this is the outcome. It's just normalized in our society to see these full avenues with tents and cardboards where they sleep. Cais do Estoril, which I walk by every day, all you see is people using drugs. It affects society in a way of seeing this issue, and because it's an increasing problem.
Do you think there is a stereotype regarding people in the situation of homelessness?
Most definitely. But the thing is, nowadays people tend to be against stereotypes, but until what point are those stereotypes true? It's not like it's a false stereotype that homeless people do drugs. We see it. I've seen them injecting themselves, carrying around spoons. Of course, there's various reasons for those people going homeless, but I feel like those who really try to get off that position are those who are not abusing on drugs. This was more of an insensitive take, but now looking in a more, putting myself in their shoes, I think they go through a lot of mental health issues. When I'm going to school in the morning, I always put on this big jacket because I feel cold, but I'm not the one sleeping on the cardboard beds the whole night, going through all of this wind. Most of their actions, of them being a little bit aggressive or not being so lovable and caring, it comes from the position that they're in. You have nothing, you have no one. That makes them build these walls around them. I can comprehend those actions, and all of that sadness is the reason why they tend to go on drugs, into alcohol, the lack of love. I read this incredible book named Capitães da Areia, and it wasn't about homeless people, but it was about kids living in these type of conditions. And the main focus of the book is what lack of love does to a soul. After reading that book, I gained a lot of empathy.
What would you suggest to reduce the number of homeless people?
I would pair up with an institution that already has, a big rate of success, and I would work with them to distribute food or even shelters. make this group and I would tell them about reintroducing them into society, and maybe a lot of motivation with therapists, and give them love and care, because this something that their soul is begging for. Give them motivation and faith. I have this quote that I always keep in my heart as an anthem, and I don't remember who exactly said it, but it goes like this. Sometimes we feel that what we do is just a small drop in the ocean, but the ocean would be smaller without that drop. I hope this serves you a motivation to always seek to do the best and for you to contribute in society. And I think that Nokas, Pedro, Nino, and Zain, they took this quote and they put it to action, contributing in a beautiful way to help homelessness. And I hope I also contribute for this amazing project.